I mean, he could have made a sculpture of a black person who looks like Zeus or something. Instead, he gave us a statue of Queen Latifah on her day off. Now, it used to be that if you were in the mood to see some exotic contemporary sculptures that were created by an unimpressive foreign artist, you had to go to a museum. And that was pretty much your only option. You know, it was like going to a movie theater before Netflix or buying a book at Barnes & Noble before Amazon. We had dedicated buildings for everything, including contemporary art. And if you didn't drive to a museum with an express intent of quietly observing a groundbreaking new sculpture, in all likelihood, you probably wouldn't see one at all. But then, as we all know, museums fell out of favor, at least for this particular purpose. You find a lot of theories as to why that happened, but in this case, the simplest explanation is probably the best. People stopped going to museums to see contemporary art because contemporary art is really, really bad. And normally, when people stop consuming content because it's bad, that forces some kind of change in the content. The creators might go back to the drawing board and come up with something else as a way to entice audiences. That's normally how these things go. But in the field of contemporary art, which of course is my true passion in life, that's not what happened. Instead, artists, and particularly sculptors, have come up with new ways to force people to look at their most unimpressive and pretentious creations. Maybe no sculptor on the planet is more adept at this particular skill than a man that you never heard of named Thomas Price. Without any sense of shame, Thomas Price has compelled innocent bystanders to observe his garbage sculptures by placing these sculptures in their way in public places. In fact, in some cases, he's placing these sculptures in the middle of walkways. And on top of that, every single one of these sculptures depicts the same thing, which is a nameless, random black woman who looks very annoyed and unpleasant. Yes, all over the world, sculptures of random black women are being thrust upon the public, and it's all because of a British guy named Thomas Price, who's apparently very angry that people don't go to museums anymore. This is actually something of an epidemic. So we'll go through some of these black woman statues here. This is a picture of one of them. It's from New Orleans City Park, and as you can see, the woman is positioned directly on top of the walking path. And according to the official description of the sculpture, quote, Price's sculpture, titled Time Unfolding 2023, is a 9-foot-tall statue of a woman looking down at her cell phone, seemingly paused in contemplation. The work is part of a series depicting everyday fictional subjects at a monumental scale, combining traditional sculpting and digital technology to question how society projects ideas and expectations through public space, close quote. Now, to me, this looks like a customer service representative for Frontier Airlines refusing to take my complaint seriously, but I guess she's supposed to look contemplative. And it wasn't just New Orleans that was treated to this extraordinary combination of sculpting and technology, whatever that means. The good people of Florence were also treated to a blinged-out gold version of the sculpture. Here's what that looks like. Reportedly, this particular statue was vandalized a few times. The authorities condemned the vandalism, which they described as racist, but at the same time, the authorities didn't explain why, in their understanding, Thomas Price is not also a racist. And after all, he's the guy who's constantly making sculptures about random, unimpressive-looking black women looking at their phones, and then he forces everyone to look at these sculptures. Seems kind of like something that an obsessive-compulsive Klansman would do as a practical joke, if we're being honest. Here's another one of his sculptures in London, for example. And this is from 3 Mills Park. Again, it's 9 feet tall. And according to Price, quote, I want this sculpture to be an opportunity for people to connect emotionally with an image of someone they might not have noticed before. And then by way of explaining his obsession with black women looking at their phones, Price said, quote, white artists are putting themselves forward to create replacement sculptures of slave owners with no sense of irony. That's a savior complex, and that exemplifies what is wrong when even the solution doesn't involve the black experience, close quote. So what exactly is the black experience besides looking at your cell phone? I mean, based on Thomas Price's body of work, that's a good question. His answer, from what I can tell, is that the black experience also involves being overweight and looking extremely annoyed all the time. And that's all of his statues of the black experience. That's what they all are. And that would explain this statue, which he just put up in Rotterdam Central Station in the Netherlands. As you can see, this one's a real winner. Apparently, it's supposed to be the same black woman from London, except she's added a few pounds to her waistline. That's what happens when you're a statue. You know, you're standing around a lot, not burning a lot of calories. So maybe you gain some weight. And her cell phone ran out of battery, so she doesn't have a cell phone. So we have kind of a narrative unfolding here. And if you follow these statues from place to place, you'll really see that story being told. Contemporary art is truly full of surprises. And so is Thomas Price, apparently. Because as you may have seen, in his latest act of mass artistic harassment, Price has managed to have one of his plus-size black woman sculptures installed in the middle of Times Square so that tens of thousands, if not millions of people, will be forced to look at it. He's genuinely outdone himself, at least in terms of securing a captive audience for his sculptures of unkempt black women. Watch.
A new statue in Times Square we're told, turning heads. It's making people not only stop and stare, but also reflect. A rare feat in the middle of one of the busiest places in the world. Zinnia Maldonado shows us why.
At 12 feet tall, in the middle of Times Square, stands a bronze sculpture of a young woman.
It's instantly stood out. It's powerful.
It's so tall and big.
The sculpture, created by artist Thomas Price, was unveiled at Duffy Square last week, and in just a matter of days, it has stopped hundreds in their tracks. Who is she? Well, technically, she's whoever you want her to be.
Me being a plus-size black woman, I kind of looking at it was just like, oh, I wonder what me as a small child would have thought looking at something like that. Representation.
Tourists and New Yorkers we spoke with expressed different interpretations of what she represents to them.
It's a plus-size woman. I'm a plus-size man. I'm African-American. It's an African-American woman statue. So just seeing another piece for me to stop and just have a moment with was very powerful.
If you look at the eyes, it's looking straight at something. It's focused. It's purposeful.
I really love the woman who praises it. She's trying to find some way to praise this statue because she doesn't want to seem racist. And so she says, it's really tall. Like if that's the best, that's a pretty good. I mean, if you make a statue, a 12-foot tall statue, and you show it to someone and say, what do you think of my statue? And they go, oh man, it's so tall. Then that's a pretty good sign that they don't actually like the statue. Now, at the risk of offending all of the plus-size black people who find this statue to be inspiring, I do have to offer some criticism here. But before I do that, I'll offer a compliment to Thomas Price. And according to the Times Square website, this statue was inspired by Michelangelo's statue of David, which we'll put up on the screen here just as for a comparison. Quoting from the Times Square website, in her depiction, one recognizes a shared humanity, yet the contrapposto pose of her body, is that like I don't know, and the ease of her stance is a subtle nod to Michelangelo's David. Close quote. Now, if that's the case, and I have no reason to doubt the Times Square website, then we can only thank God for the fact that Thomas Price did not emulate the whole nudity aspect of Michelangelo's David statue. So, that's something to be thankful for. The bigger difference, though, aside from the fact that the statue of David is made with infinitely more skill and artistry, is that David memorializes and honors the biblical figure of David, who is both a real person and also one of the most iconic religious and literary figures in the history of the world. And by contrast, the black woman statue, and the others cropping up across the globe, memorializes nobody in particular. Now, maybe it's supposed to be a celebration of blackness or something, but it doesn't even accomplish that because the woman is frumpy and overweight. I mean, he could have made a sculpture of a black person who looks like Zeus or something, like impressive, strong, imposing. Instead, he gave us a statue of Queen Latifah on her day off. Back in the day, animals used to be raised on small family pastures, but today we have these. They're called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs for short. The average dairy CAFO has over 1,000 cows, and that means, a ton of manure. And what do you think happens to all that animal poo? Well, does it magically disappear? No, it's getting stored in giant vats and can leach into our groundwater. Well, you might think it's no big deal. Well, let me tell you about this little county right next to Green Bay, Wisconsin, where cattle outnumber people 5-1. When they tested the water there, 60% of wells were contaminated with fecal microbes, which means crap, by the way, along with high levels of nitrates, which can lead to all sorts of problems like birth defects and cancer. With all the runoff from industrial chemicals and pharmaceuticals in our water supply, the last thing you need is an extra helping of feces when you take a sip. That's why I'm proud to partner with Cove Pure, who is revolutionizing the way that we purify water. Most filters on the market won't remove all the dangerous microscopic contaminants being released into our water supply, but Cove Pure can. Their clear wave reverse osmosis technology is built for even the smallest particles. It's certified to remove up to 99.9% of total contaminants in your water, including the ones related to animal feces. The best part is you don't have to go through the hassle of a complex full home setup to protect yourself. Cove Pure sits beautifully on my countertop. Just plug it in and that's it. No drilling, no plumbers needed. One tap and I can get pure water at whatever temperature I want, hot, cold, or warm, instantly. Clean drinking water is one of the most important investments that you can make for your family's health. That's why I partnered with them to get you guys $200 off. So make sure you use my link below or go to covepure.com/Walsh to get it now. Now, public art, particularly statues and monuments, should do two things. First, it should point our eyes and hearts towards something beautiful. And secondly, it should celebrate some important figure in our history or our shared cultural mythology. And as long as it does the first, which is point our eyes towards something beautiful, the second isn't always necessary, but these statues do neither. And at the same time, the left is glorifying this garbage. They're tearing down statues that actually do memorialize significant figures in our history. New York took down the Teddy Roosevelt statue outside of a museum of natural history. New Orleans and Virginia both got rid of their Robert E. Lee statues. And now in Chicago, the mayor is suggesting that the city is about to hide two statues of Christopher Columbus, an infinitely more impressive man than any politician who's ever led the city of Chicago. Watch.
We do have to make sure that our presentation is depicting not just truth, but the best part of our existence, which is our collective humanity.
The Park District is planning to clear away the larger Grant Park statue's base and redesign the plaza as a gathering space that will accommodate temporary art.
Now, as the Chicago Tribune summarizes this plan, quote, the Grant Park and Arrigo Park Columbus statues have hung in political limbo since then Mayor Lori Lightfoot removed them amid protests in 2020, but Mayor Brandon Johnson's newly appointed Park District CEO announced a deal last week to loan the smaller statue, which had been in Arrigo Park, for a planned Italian immigrant museum and clear away the larger Grant Park statue's base. The Italian-American Human Resources Foundation of Chicago blasted the agreement to get the statue back as cultural treason, saying, quote, the statue will be hidden away indoors out of public sight as part of an undefined museum-style exhibit, a sad final disposition of a statue of the heroic navigator whose voyages led to the introduction of Western European civilization and culture to a new world, close quote. I think cultural treason is one of the better ways of describing what's happening here. They're not just removing the statues of heroes like Columbus, as deranged as that is already, to remove those statues. They're also installing random obese women as a replacement. And they're doing it because they have no historical heroes of their own. You know, everyone who was born prior to, say, 2005 is inherently problematic to the left. And therefore, instead of monuments to great men like Columbus, people all over the world are being forced against their will to look at displays of generic mediocrity. But as annoying and depressing as this might seem, you have to remember that the reason these statues are being inserted into every public space imaginable is that if people aren't forced to look at them, nobody would bother. This art is worth precisely what people would pay to see it, which is $0. And that is why Thomas Price and his weird obsession with statues of bored-looking black women are today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.